Let me ask you a question. Have you ever met someone who feeds off your attention, who twists your reality until you question your own mind, and who acts as if the entire universe should orbit around their needs? That's not just selfishness. That's narcissism, a psychological vortex that can consume your peace, confidence, and purpose. Today, I'm going to share 5 psychological moves rooted in neuroscience and behavioral psychology that narcissists absolutely cannot handle. By the end of this talk, you'll be equipped to stand your ground, reclaim your clarity, and disarm their manipulation tactics without sacrificing your integrity. So, if you've ever felt trapped in the gravitational pull of a narcissist's ego, listen closely. This might be the most important 15 minutes you spend this year. Radical non-reactivity is the cornerstone of protecting your mental clarity when you're dealing with narcissists. It's not just a technique, it's a discipline rooted in how your nervous system processes threat and safety. If you think about it, most people imagine that self-defense in these interactions comes down to having the perfect comeback or an ironclad argument. But in reality, narcissists don't care about logic. They care about one thing: your reaction. They want to see you lose your center because your emotional turmoil reinforces their illusion of power. So here's what happens neurologically. When a narcissist insults you, criticizes you, or tries to provoke you, your amygdala, the alarm system of the brain, lights up. You feel a surge of adrenaline, your heart rate increases, and your breathing becomes shallow. These are signals to your body that you're under attack. And in that heightened state, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking and impulse control, goes offline. That's when you're most likely to snap back, to defend yourself, to try to prove them wrong. And in doing so, you're feeding exactly what they crave: evidence that they can control how you feel. The skill of radical non-reactivity begins by recognizing this internal cascade before it hijacks you. The moment you sense that rush of energy, you can remind yourself, this is biology, not destiny. You don't have to become the reaction. You can pause and create a gap between stimulus and response. In that gap, you reclaim choice. That gap is your liberation from their manipulation. I want you to visualize this process like watching a storm through a window. The thunder is loud, the rain is pounding against the glass, but you are inside observing. You don't have to run into the storm. You don't have to get drenched in it. That simple shift from participant to observer is where your power lies. One of the most effective ways to anchor yourself in this place of observation is through controlled breathing. In those first few seconds after a narcissistic jab, bring your attention to the sensations in your body. Feel the tightness in your throat, the heat rising in your chest, the impulse to speak. Instead of acting on that impulse, gently breathe in through your nose for 4 counts. Hold your breath for a count of 4. Then exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 8. You can repeat this 2 or 3 times. What this does is activate your vagus nerve, which signals your parasympathetic nervous system to calm your heart rate and lower cortisol levels. You are literally telling your body, we are safe. And when you feel safe, you can think clearly. You are no longer an emotional puppet in their theater. Now, some people worry that non-reactivity makes them passive or weak, as if staying calm means you're allowing disrespect to continue. But I want to be clear, radical non-reactivity is not about letting anyone cross your boundaries. It's about choosing when and how you will respond so that your energy isn't wasted on fruitless arguments. You can still set firm limits. You can still walk away, but you're doing it from a grounded, centered place instead of a triggered one. Think about a time when you erupted in anger or tried to defend yourself over and over. Did the narcissist ever say, "You're right, I was wrong"? Probably not. Instead, they used your reactivity to paint you as unstable, to discredit you, or to justify their behavior. This is why practicing calm neutrality is so powerful. When you don't give them an emotional foothold, they have nothing to twist into a new narrative. It can help to have a mantra you repeat silently as you breathe. Something like, "I don't engage with distortion," or "Their chaos is not my chaos." This anchors your mind while your body calms down. Over time, you'll notice that the gap between provocation and response gets wider, and in that space, you can decide whether this conversation deserves any of your energy at all. Another important aspect is eye contact. If you're comfortable, maintain steady, neutral eye contact without glaring or looking away nervously. Just steady presence. This signals to their nervous system that you are not intimidated. You are simply unmoved. Narcissists often expect people to flinch or deflate when they attack. When you don't, it's like pulling the rug out from under their pattern. And if you need to, it's absolutely acceptable to excuse yourself and take a break. A simple, calm statement, "I'm not going to continue this conversation right now," followed by walking away, can be far more impactful than any defensive explanation. Remember, radical non-reactivity is not something you perfect overnight. It's a practice. It's a skill you build one interaction at a time. And every moment you remain grounded when someone tries to provoke you, you are literally rewiring your brain for resilience. You don't have to be an actor in their drama anymore. You can step off the stage, observe the performance, and realize that their need for chaos does not obligate you to participate. Gray rocking is one of the simplest and most counterintuitive strategies you can use when you're dealing with someone who thrives on your emotional reactions. The term might sound a little abstract at first, but it simply means that you deliberately make yourself as uninteresting as a dull, colorless rock. From a psychological standpoint, narcissists are always scanning the environment for what we call narcissistic supply, which is any form of attention, positive admiration, fearful compliance, angry protest. It doesn't matter if you're praising them or condemning them. The fact that you're reacting means they still have a hook in your mind. Imagine for a moment that their nervous system is wired like a radar, constantly sweeping for signals that they still matter more than anyone else in the room. They're scanning your face, your tone, your gestures, always testing to see if they can spark something. That's why standard logic and argument usually fail. If you confront them with facts or try to correct their version of reality, they don't process it the way you expect. Instead, they feel an internal satisfaction because you are still making them the center of your world. And so the cycle of provocation continues. Gray rocking interrupts that cycle in a way that is deeply unsettling for them. When you stop offering vivid reactions, when you become steady, unremarkable, and emotionally neutral, they start to lose interest. It's similar to a child who pokes at a toy to see if it will light up or play music. And when it doesn't, they toss it aside and look for something more stimulating. Narcissists have the same pattern of attention. If you no longer provide the rush of drama, they'll eventually redirect their focus elsewhere. Here's what this looks like in practice. Suppose a narcissist tries to bait you by saying something designed to provoke guilt or outrage. Maybe they say, "Wow, you've really let yourself go lately," or "Everyone agrees you're just too sensitive." The instinctive response is to defend yourself, to prove you're not what they say. But that's the trap. That is the exact moment they're hoping you will combust. Instead, you use a calm, flat tone. You reply with a simple acknowledgement that neither agrees nor disagrees. You might say, "Okay," or "That's your opinion." You don't elaborate. You don't ask them to explain. You don't justify yourself. This minimal engagement does two things. First, it helps your nervous system remain stable because you're not revving up your defense mechanisms. Second, it deprives them of the emotional feedback loop they need to feel powerful over time. This can be so frustrating for them that they look for someone else to provoke. Gray rocking can feel unnatural, especially if you're someone who values authentic communication and wants to resolve misunderstandings. But the key to remember is that with a narcissist, resolution is rarely the goal. Their aim is to pull you back into a dynamic where they are in control of the narrative and you are constantly on the defensive. When you offer them no material to work with, they're forced to sit with their own emptiness, and this is an experience they will often avoid at all costs. It can help to prepare neutral phrases in advance so you're not scrambling in the moment. Think of them as short, rehearsed scripts that protect your energy. Phrases like, "I hear you," or "Noted," or even a polite nod can be enough. If you feel compelled to say more, you can still keep it dull and factual, or "I'll look into that," or "I don't have anything to add." You're not offering any emotional highs or lows, just a steady, boring presence. Another dimension of this strategy is nonverbal communication. If you can maintain relaxed posture, neutral facial expressions, and calm eye contact, you amplify the effect. Your body language reinforces the message that you are not a source of entertainment or drama. You are simply there, grounded and unmoved. Over time, some people will notice that the narcissist escalates in the short term, almost like a last-ditch attempt to get a reaction. That's normal. When you shift your response pattern, you're disrupting a dynamic that has probably been in place for years. They may try to provoke you more intensely, criticize you more harshly, or even pretend to be conciliatory to see if they can hook you again. It's important not to interpret this as failure. In fact, it's evidence that your new approach is working because it's forcing them to confront the reality that they don't control you the way they used to. If you ever feel tempted to slip back into old habits of explaining or defending yourself, take a slow breath and remind yourself of the long-term goal, protecting your clarity and peace. Each time you practice gray rocking, you reinforce new neural pathways that associate calm neutrality with safety and self-respect. And with time, you'll start to notice something remarkable. Their words lose their power to wound you. Their approval loses its hold over you, and you begin to feel your own presence growing stronger than any story they've tried to impose on you. Boundary precision is one of the most essential practices you can develop if you want to reclaim your autonomy from someone who has built their entire identity around believing the rules don't apply to them. It's important to understand that narcissists interpret boundaries very differently from healthy people. In a typical, mutually respectful relationship, when you express a boundary, like needing time to yourself or declining a request, the other person, even if they're disappointed, recognizes your right to set that limit. But for a narcissist, a boundary feels like an injury to their ego, a personal rejection that they will often go to great lengths to override. That's why so many people find themselves exhausted by the constant erosion of their limits, because over time, it can feel easier to just give in rather than face their relentless pushback. There's a neuroscience component to this dynamic that explains why holding a boundary feels so uncomfortable at first. When you declare a firm limit, your nervous system registers it as potential conflict, triggering the amygdala's threat response. You might feel your heart race, your voice tighten, your stomach clench. That discomfort is often mistaken for a sign you're doing something wrong. But it isn't. It's simply the body's way of alerting you that you're stepping outside old patterns of appeasement and people-pleasing. If you can recognize this discomfort as a normal part of the process, you'll be less likely to abandon your boundary the moment it's challenged. Imagine for a moment that your boundaries are like the walls of a house. They define where you end and where others begin. If you don't maintain them, if you leave the door open to endless negotiations, you're inviting someone who feels entitled to everything. You have to come and go as they please. Over time, you lose the sense of where your needs and values actually reside. Precision is what rebuilds those walls, brick by brick, so you can feel safe in your own space again. One of the most powerful aspects of boundary precision is clarity. Narcissists are experts at exploiting vagueness. If you say, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't talk to me like that," you leave the door open for interpretation, debate, and deflection. Instead, a precise boundary sounds like this: "If you continue to raise your voice, I will leave the conversation." Notice how specific and action-oriented that is. You're not threatening or justifying. You're simply stating what you will do, and you're prepared to follow through. This is important because consistency is what teaches a narcissist that you're no longer available for manipulation. If you set a boundary but never reinforce it, they learn that your words are flexible. So when you say you'll end a conversation or walk away, you have to actually do it. At first, they may escalate, testing to see if you really mean it. That's not failure. It's proof that your new approach is having an impact. Each time you hold firm, you rewire your brain's association with boundaries, replacing fear with a sense of self-respect. When you're in the moment, it can help to slow down the pace of the interaction. Narcissists thrive on rapid exchanges where they can derail your thinking. If you notice yourself getting flooded, your thoughts racing, your heart pounding, pause before responding. Take a breath. Even a few seconds of silence can disrupt their rhythm. From this calmer place, you can choose language that is both respectful and non-negotiable. For example, "I'm not willing to continue this discussion right now," or "This topic isn't open for debate." Body language plays a huge role too. If you say, "I need you to stop," but your shoulders are slumped and your gaze is on the floor, your nonverbal signals may contradict your words. Instead, stand or sit upright, keep your tone measured, and make steady eye contact if it feels safe. You're sending the message, "I am grounded in my position." Over time, this alignment between what you say and how you hold yourself creates an unshakable sense of personal authority. Some people feel guilt when they first begin practicing boundary precision. It's common to worry that you're being unkind or unreasonable. But I'd invite you to consider that healthy boundaries are an expression of respect for yourself and others. You are simply defining what behaviors you will and won't participate in. You're not trying to control them. You're controlling your own participation. There is a profound difference between those two things. If you ever doubt whether your boundaries are valid, remember that anyone who genuinely cares about you will eventually accept and honor them, even if it's inconvenient. Someone who continuously tries to erode them is showing you through their actions that their comfort matters more to them than your well-being. That knowledge can be painful, but it is clarifying. It allows you to see the relationship for what it is, not what you wish it could be. Ultimately, boundary precision is about giving yourself permission to protect your mental and emotional space without apology. You don't need elaborate explanations or emotional performances. You simply need clarity, consistency, and the willingness to follow through. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes until one day you realize you no longer feel the need to justify the simple truth that you are worthy of respect. Tactical empathy without surrender is one of the most counterbalancing strategies you can bring into an interaction with a narcissist. Most people hear the word empathy and think it means you have to sympathize with the person or agree with their behavior, but that's not what we're talking about here. Tactical empathy is about seeing the patterns that drive them and acknowledging their perspective without giving up your own. It's the art of understanding their emotional terrain so you don't get lost in it yourself. There's a neuroscience component to this process that makes it especially powerful. When you mirror back a person's feelings in a calm, contained way, it reduces their reactivity. The amygdala, which normally fires up when someone feels criticized or ignored, begins to quiet down because the brain perceives a form of recognition. For a narcissist who is often in a perpetual state of scanning for threats to their self-image, this brief moment of recognition can feel disarming. It's like offering just enough acknowledgement to lower their defenses while you hold your ground. Here's what that looks like in practice. Let's say a narcissist accuses you of never appreciating anything they do. Your instinct might be to counter with all the times you thanked them to prove that their accusation is unfair. That's the bait. Because the moment you start justifying yourself, you're in their loop, trying to win their validation. Instead, you can respond with a calm, even tone. "I hear that you feel unappreciated." You're naming their feeling without agreeing with the content of their claim. You're not saying they're right or wrong. You're simply acknowledging their perception. This subtle distinction matters because it keeps you out of the dynamic of defending and explaining. You're stepping off the battlefield and observing it instead. The narcissist may pause, trying to figure out how to escalate, because you haven't given them an opening to pull you into argument. That pause is where your leverage lies. When you practice tactical empathy, it helps to remind yourself that it's not about fixing them or making them feel better. You're not taking responsibility for their emotional state. You're simply signaling that you see what's happening without absorbing it. This is where so many people get trapped, believing that if they can just be more understanding, more compassionate, more patient, the narcissist will finally reciprocate. But the reality is narcissists rarely change through insight alone. Their patterns are too deeply wired. What you can change is your own response, and that can transform the dynamic entirely. Think of tactical empathy as a shield that deflects their projections without letting them penetrate you. It's like saying, I see that you're upset, but I'm not going to abandon my perspective to manage your emotions. In doing so, you preserve your own clarity. You're neither fighting nor surrendering. You're simply standing in your own space. One technique that can help reinforce this is called labeling. When the narcissist says something provocative, you label the emotion behind it. For example, it sounds like you're really frustrated. Or it seems like you feel I'm not listening to you. Notice that you're not agreeing with their story. You're reflecting the feeling. This is incredibly powerful because it short-circuits the escalation that often happens when someone feels unseen. But again, you do this without stepping into the role of caretaker. There's an important nuance here. This approach works best when you remain internally detached from the outcome. If you're labeling their feelings as a strategy to get them to change or treat you better, you may end up disappointed. The purpose is to create psychological distance for yourself, not to rehabilitate them. Over time, this can dramatically reduce the emotional volatility in your interactions because you're no longer reinforcing their cycles with defensiveness or appeasement. It's normal to feel uncomfortable when you first practice tactical empathy. You might wonder if you're being inauthentic or manipulative. But remember, authenticity doesn't mean you have to share every thought or feeling. It means you act in alignment with your values, which in this case includes protecting your own mental health. You're not pretending to agree. You're simply choosing a response that maintains your integrity and de-escalates unnecessary conflict. Sometimes the narcissist will push harder when they sense you aren't engaging emotionally. They may accuse you of being cold, uncaring, or detached. This is another test to see if they can provoke you back into old habits. When this happens, you can calmly repeat your acknowledgement. I hear that you're upset, or I understand that this is important to you. You don't need to embellish. You don't need to justify. You don't need to collapse your boundary to prove you care. Over time, you'll notice that you feel more centered in these interactions because you're not giving away your power every time they demand it. You're observing without absorbing, responding without surrendering. This is the essence of tactical empathy. It's how you hold compassion for yourself while recognizing the humanity of the other person, even if their behavior is deeply dysfunctional. And when you master this, you'll find that their ability to derail your peace begins to fade because you finally understand that you can witness their storm without ever stepping into it. Detachment from outcome is often the most challenging and liberating mindset you can adopt when dealing with a narcissist. If you look closely, you'll notice that most of their power over you comes not from what they say or do in the moment, but from the way they keep you hooked into the fantasy that somehow you can finally resolve the conflict if you just say the right thing or respond in the right way. That longing for closure is what keeps you circling them like a planet locked in orbit. It's deeply human to want resolution. We are wired to complete unfinished loops. When there's tension or misunderstanding, the brain interprets it as an open file that needs to be closed, a problem that needs to be solved. This is partly why it feels so intolerable to walk away without feeling heard or validated. But the truth is, narcissists are experts at weaponizing this need for resolution. They dangle it just out of reach, giving you crumbs of acknowledgement or occasional moments of warmth to keep you invested in trying to fix what can't be fixed. Detachment from outcome means you release that fantasy. You stop needing them to agree with you, to admit fault, to see your perspective. You don't invest in trying to earn their approval or understanding. You let go of the belief that if you just try a little harder, you'll finally reach some mutual place of truth and respect. Because in reality, that destination doesn't exist with someone who is fundamentally committed to maintaining their own superiority at all costs. When you practice this mindset, you reclaim an enormous amount of energy. You no longer have to monitor every word you say to anticipate their reaction. You don't have to replay every conversation in your mind, wondering what you could have said differently. You can show up with honesty and clarity, knowing that their response is not a measure of your worth. It's simply information about who they are. This is where you begin to see the power of neutrality. Not indifference, which is a kind of numbness, but neutrality, the state of being fully present without attachment to a specific outcome. You can calmly say, "I disagree," without needing them to see it your way. You can walk away from a conversation without feeling compelled to enter it just because they accuse you of being unfair or unkind. You can stop performing for their validation. There's a tremendous freedom in realizing that you don't need to win the argument. You don't need to convince them of your goodness. You don't need to get the last word. When you release that need, you become unshakable because your self-worth no longer depends on their reaction. In moments when you feel that old compulsion to re-engage, to clarify, to defend, to rescue the conversation from their distortions, it can help to pause and ask yourself, what am I trying to secure here? What outcome am I so attached to that I'm willing to sacrifice my peace to get it? Almost always, the answer is some form of recognition. The moment you name it, you can see it more clearly, and you can decide whether that effort is worth the cost. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about integrity or honesty. It means you stop needing the narcissist to meet you there. You can maintain your own standards of respectful communication without expecting them to reciprocate. And when they inevitably respond with blame or contempt, you can observe it without personalizing it. It's their pattern, not your failure. Practicing this detachment might feel disorienting at first. You may even feel guilt, as if you're giving up on the relationship. But you're not giving up. You're giving back what never belonged to you. In the first place, the responsibility for their emotions, their choices, and their perception of reality. One practical exercise is to set an intention before you interact. Tell yourself, I will share what's true for me without needing them to understand it. That phrase alone can act like an anchor, reminding you that your goal isn't to produce a specific reaction, but to honor your own clarity. When you do this consistently, you start to experience interactions with more objectivity and less emotional turbulence. You also create a space inside yourself where their approval or disapproval no longer dictates your emotional state. That's where you begin to experience genuine sovereignty, the sense that you belong fully to yourself. And once you taste that, you will never again feel compelled to barter your peace for someone else's validation. Ultimately, detachment from outcome is the recognition that no matter how skillfully you communicate, no matter how patient or empathic you are, you cannot make someone see you accurately if they're invested in misunderstanding you. And when you finally accept that, you stop giving your power away to their narratives and return it to where it belongs with you. Pattern recognition is one of the most critical psychological shifts you can make when dealing with a narcissist, because it allows you to step out of the illusion and finally see the cycle for what it is. Narcissistic behavior is not random, even though it might feel chaotic. It follows a very specific loop: idealize, devalue, discard, repeat. And unless you recognize that pattern, you will constantly be caught off guard, wondering what you did wrong, what changed, or why things seemed perfect one day and hostile the next. That confusion is not an accident. It's the very tool that keeps you emotionally tethered. Our brains are designed to seek patterns and form narratives. When someone treats us with kindness, then cruelty, then kindness again, the brain tries to make sense of it by creating meaning. You might think they're just having a bad day, or maybe I triggered them. The truth is, when we can't predict someone's behavior, our dopamine system actually becomes more active. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the most powerful ways to form emotional bonds. Unhealthy ones, but bonds nonetheless. Narcissists operate inside this loop, often unconsciously, because they learned early on that control and validation come from instability. And if you're not tracking the pattern, you'll fall into the trap of responding to each moment as if it's isolated. You'll try to fix what they say is wrong today, only to find a new complaint waiting tomorrow. You'll keep negotiating with shifting standards that were never meant to be fair in the first place. But the moment you recognize the loop, everything starts to change. You stop reacting to the content of their words and start noticing the context. You stop trying to decode their mixed signals and start seeing the repetition. It's like stepping back from a painting and realizing the brushstrokes form a shape you couldn't see up close. Once you identify the pattern, you stop blaming yourself for the inconsistencies. You stop assuming their approval means progress. This doesn't mean you become cynical. It means you become aware. You can still engage with them if necessary, but you're no longer emotionally invested in their approval. You're not trying to rescue the relationship from the very behavior that keeps it broken. You understand that some dynamics aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to be recognized so you can stop participating in them. The key here is emotional memory. Each time the pattern repeats, love bombing followed by withdrawal, support followed by sabotage, you file it away, not with judgment, but with clarity. Over time, you build a library of data points that remind you this is not new. This is not about you. This is what they do. And from that awareness, you gain leverage. The next time they suddenly shower you with affection or praise, you'll be able to enjoy it without becoming dependent on it. You'll sense that it's part of the cycle, not a sign that things have truly changed. The next time they accuse you of being selfish or overly sensitive, you'll remember that they've said the same thing before, regardless of how you acted. Their script doesn't evolve because it was never about your behavior. It was always about their need to dominate the emotional space. One way to strengthen this awareness is to write down the pattern each time it plays out. You don't need long entries. Just a few sentences. What they said, how you felt, what happened after. With enough entries, you'll start to see the repetition with stunning clarity. And that repetition will inoculate you against their attempts to reset the narrative. They might say, I've changed, or let's start over, but you'll have a record that says otherwise. And that evidence will remind you that real change comes with accountability and consistency, not temporary charm or dramatic apologies. Pattern recognition also helps you reclaim your intuition. One of the most damaging effects of narcissistic relationships is the erosion of your ability to trust your own perceptions. You begin to doubt your instincts, your emotions, even your memory. But as you observe the cycle playing out again and again, you start to realize that your inner signals were accurate all along. You weren't overreacting. You weren't too sensitive. You were responding to manipulation that was deliberately confusing. That restoration of trust in yourself is one of the most powerful outcomes of recognizing the pattern. You no longer need someone else to confirm what's real. You see it clearly. And from that clarity, you can begin to move differently, not with fear or resentment, but with quiet certainty. And when you get to that place, you'll realize that you don't need to warn them, explain to them, or wait for them to understand what they've done. You simply step out of the loop, fully aware, no longer caught in the illusion that this time will be different. Strategic withdrawal is not about giving up, disappearing, or ghosting someone out of spite. It's about reclaiming your nervous system from a cycle of psychological chaos that was never meant to resolve. It's a conscious decision to stop engaging with behavior that only exists to destabilize you. When you're dealing with a narcissist, staying in the game, trying to keep the peace, trying to reason, trying to prove yourself, starts to cost more than it gives. That constant engagement pulls you into a feedback loop of self-doubt and emotional exhaustion. Strategic withdrawal is the moment you realize that you're not obligated to keep showing up for a dynamic that's structured around keeping you off balance. The brain responds to unpredictability with a kind of hyperfocus. It's actually a survival mechanism. If someone in your environment is volatile, part of your attention stays locked on them at all times. It's the same mechanism that makes you watch the door in a room full of strangers. You're assessing threat constantly. Over time, your mind begins to associate the narcissist's emotional shifts with your own sense of safety. You begin to overanalyze every tone, every glance, every word, trying to predict and prepare. That's not connection. That's hypervigilance. Strategic withdrawal interrupts this loop. And it's not just physical, it's psychological. It means you stop playing the role they've assigned to you. You stop correcting their narrative. You stop needing to explain yourself. You stop stepping back into conversations that you know will go nowhere. The withdrawal isn't about punishing them. It's about protecting your energy and breaking the cycle of reactivity. Because the truth is, the more you engage, the more fuel you're giving them. Even arguing with them is a form of attention that reinforces their sense of control. This is where it gets subtle. You can be in the same room with someone and still withdraw psychologically. You can listen without absorbing, observe without participating. When you stop offering them the reactions they've relied on, you're pulling the plug on a system that was running off your emotional energy. They may escalate at first, push harder, get louder, try to bait you. That's because they're sensing the shift and the loss of control threatens their identity. But that's not a signal to re-engage. That's confirmation that your withdrawal is working. You don't owe a narcissist a dramatic exit speech. You don't need them to understand or approve of your decision to pull back. In fact, seeking that acknowledgement is often what keeps people stuck. Withdrawal is not about closure. It's about clarity. You know what this pattern is. You've seen how it plays out. You've given your best effort, your patience, your explanations, and now you're choosing peace over performance. Sometimes the withdrawal will be complete. You'll cut off contact entirely. Other times it will be more subtle, reduced interaction, emotional disengagement, tighter boundaries. What matters is the internal shift, the part of you that used to wait for their approval. That part starts turning inward. The part of you that used to walk on eggshells, that part starts walking away from the noise. Withdrawal gives your nervous system room to breathe again. It gives your mind the quiet it needs to sort through what's real and what was manipulation. And yes, it might feel lonely at first, especially if the narcissist occupied a central space in your emotional world. But that loneliness isn't emptiness, it's space. And in that space, something profound starts to happen. You begin to hear your own thoughts again. You begin to notice what you actually enjoy, how you actually feel, what you actually want, without filtering it through someone else's demands. That's not withdrawal in the negative sense. That's reconnection with yourself. One of the most empowering realizations is that you don't need to respond to every invitation to chaos. Not every provocation deserves your presence. Strategic withdrawal is you recognizing the cost of your own energy and choosing to invest it where it actually brings growth, healing, stability. You're not fleeing the problem. You're removing yourself from a situation that refuses to change, no matter how much you give. And the more you practice this, the more it becomes second nature. The space you create becomes a buffer, a kind of psychological insulation. You see their games more clearly. You hear their words without attaching meaning to them. You stop waiting for the apology, the recognition, the shift that's never coming. Because now you're not anchored to their version of reality. You're grounded in your own. And when you can walk away, not in anger, not in fear, but in calm certainty, that's when you know you've really broken the cycle. Self-validation is the final, sustaining piece of this entire process. It's the part that keeps you anchored when every other strategy is tested, when every limit you set is pushed, when every attempt to disengage is met with accusations and guilt trips. It's the practice of choosing to believe in your own perception of reality, no matter how forcefully someone tries to override it. Because if there's one thing that narcissists do exceptionally well, it's convincing you that your thoughts, feelings, and experiences are flawed or exaggerated. They'll tell you you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too selfish. Over time, if you don't have an internal reference point, you start to wonder if they're right. Self-validation is the antidote to that erosion. It's a commitment to pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And then, is this feeling valid? Instead of looking outward for confirmation. This doesn't mean you can't ask trusted people for perspective, but it means you stop outsourcing your entire sense of what's true. You begin to rebuild the muscle of trusting your own observations, even if someone else insists they're false. One of the most effective ways to practice self-validation is to simply name what's happening without judgment. For example, when you feel that tightness in your chest after a conversation, you say to yourself, I feel anxious because I was just criticized in a way that didn't feel fair. You don't immediately try to talk yourself out of it. You don't minimize it. You don't rush to consider whether you misunderstood. You give yourself the courtesy of assuming that your emotional response has wisdom in it. Even if you later decide there's nuance to the situation, that initial acknowledgement is essential. It's what starts to rebuild your confidence that your emotions are data, not defects. You can see this in the body as well. When you're stuck in self-doubt, your posture changes, shoulders tense, breath shallow, eyes downcast. When you self-validate, you notice that you naturally sit a little straighter, breathe a little deeper. That's not an accident. Your nervous system responds to the message, I believe me. That's the opposite of the chronic tension that comes from being gaslit. This practice also means recognizing when you're slipping back into old patterns of explaining or defending. If you catch yourself typing out long messages to justify why you set a boundary, pause. Ask yourself, what am I hoping they will say that I'm not already willing to say to myself? Often, the answer is simple. You want them to tell you you're not a bad person for protecting yourself. But that reassurance rarely comes from someone committed to misunderstanding you. And when it doesn't come, you feel compelled to try harder. Self-validation breaks that loop by reminding you that your worthiness doesn't depend on their agreement. Sometimes people confuse self-validation with arrogance or refusal to reflect, but they're not the same thing. Arrogance says, I'm always right. Self-validation says, I'm allowed to trust my experience, and I can still be open to learning. It's the middle ground between collapsing under someone else's narrative and rigidly defending your ego. And in relationships with narcissists, that balance is what keeps you sane. You're no longer swinging between over-accommodation and total shutdown. You're centered. It's also important to remember that self-validation doesn't always feel comfortable. It often feels vulnerable at first. If you've spent years doubting your perceptions, the first time you say, I didn't deserve to be treated that way, you might feel a pang of guilt or even fear. That discomfort is simply the residue of all the conditioning that taught you to prioritize other people's reality over your own. You're not doing it wrong, you're doing something new. To strengthen this practice, it helps to create small rituals that anchor you back into your own knowing. Some people write in a journal after difficult interactions, documenting exactly what was said, how it felt, and why it crossed a line. Others keep a simple list of reminders. My feelings are valid. My needs matter. I am allowed to set limits. Over time, these practices act like guideposts. When you're tempted to second guess yourself, you have something concrete to return to. What starts to happen, and this is where the power really grows, is that your baseline self-respect increases. You don't have to keep convincing yourself of your right to have boundaries. You don't need to keep asking permission to feel what you feel. You begin to embody it automatically. And this shift is often what ultimately makes the narcissist lose interest. When someone no longer needs external validation to feel whole, they become profoundly uninteresting to a person who feeds on control. That's why self-validation isn't just a private comfort. It's a quiet revolution. It's the moment you declare, without needing to announce it, that you are the final authority on your own experience.